All right, well, it's 1 minute past. We'll go ahead and get started. Please note on this slide some details in case that answers some of your questions as we go along. We'll prompt things in the chat as well. But I just wanted to say on behalf of the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, welcome to today's webinar, Motivational Interviewing Informed Supervision with Ken Crable from C4 Innovations. We're very grateful so many of you could join us to learn more about this important topic and excited for the chance to discuss and hear what your experiences are and what the experiences of Ken as well. My name is Christina Clayton. I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest Mhctc, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. First, let's do a little land acknowledgement. Our center has the honor of working with the people living on the lands in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, and even beyond, reaching all of you in this virtual training context. And so just want to make sure we are always expressing our gratitude to the land and the people from our region, from our Seattle location, and from the land where you all sit at this moment. Next, we would like to introduce the Mhctc Network. The Mhctc Network, if you haven't heard of it, is a nationwide network that is supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The purpose includes disseminating and implementing evidence-based practices for mental health issues into the workforce. The goals include supporting evidence-based practices, heightening the awareness, knowledge, and skills of the workforce, fostering regional and national alliances, and providing and connecting you to free training and technical assistance like today. Now a little bit about our Northwest Mhctc. We are based at the University of Washington in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. We provide training in TA in evidence-based practices to Region 10. Our area of focus is evidence-based practices for serious mental health issues, such as psychosis. However, we provide training on a variety of topics, including integrated care, suicide prevention, diversity and equity issues, school mental health, peer support, trauma-informed approaches, and others. And our target workforce basically includes everybody that is doing behavioral health, but typically targets folks in mental health centers, primary care providers, and other social service staff. And we provide our mission and fulfill that with live events. We have virtual learning communities, free self-paced online courses, newsletters if you aren't getting those, our resource library, and connections to other training centers and events. It is our intention to always be mindful of using language that promotes recovery and culturally appropriate terminology. And so we just encourage everyone to think of that as you're writing comments or sharing information, that we always demonstrate respect for people's dignity and recovery-oriented practices, foster respect, human dignity, and hope. Now a little bit about some logistics during the communication of the session. Obviously, it's a pretty large audience, so all of you are muted, not appearing on video. This is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be made available on our website in a few weeks, and you'll receive an email from Zoom with a link to where we post these resources on our website. You'll also receive an email within a couple of weeks on how to access a certificate of attendance. We don't have formal CEUs, but you are able to access that if you would like to do that. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please use the chat and our team will assist. And then Ken may ask a question or feel free to communicate with each other in the chat box. For formal questions for the content, so Ken can kind of keep that sorted out, I'll be looking at that during the presentation and trying to answer as many questions during the presentation as possible. So I'll let Ken know when there's questions. So if at any time you have one, please type it in the Q&A box. We can't copy your question from the chat into Q&A, so I might have to remind you of that. But otherwise, we'll get to as many as we can during the presentation. Lastly, your feedback is really crucial to our work, so we'd really appreciate your response to a very short survey. Just take a couple minutes after the session. Our team will share that link in the chat box. You'll get an email reminder via Zoom. We are required by our funder to conduct the survey, but we actually really look at the information every time, and it really helps the speakers. It's all aggregated and confidential, and your participation helps to keep free training coming. Disclaimer, we just have to say SAMHSA sponsors this work, but this does not reflect any official position on the content. Now getting to the good stuff. I'm very happy to introduce our presenter, Ken Crable. He is a trainer. He is very well regarded in the field. If you haven't heard of him before, we are very excited to have him here today, speaking about a topic that he knows very well and has a lot of experience training in. So he has a wide variety of background from direct service and supervision and training for the last couple of decades. And we're very excited to have him here. So I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thank you so much, Christina. I appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and share a different set of slides here. I trust that everyone can see that. Just by way of a little bit more background about myself, I come from the field of working in homelessness and housing and behavioral health. And what Christina didn't mention is that she and I actually worked together at the same place in Seattle some years ago now. But at any rate, I worked for about 18 years in direct service and then began to step back and do some teaching and training around best practices in the field, and have had the privilege of being able to speak with audiences pretty much around the country and otherwise about these practices that pop up in our work. And I will say that there are lots of really important things we've learned over the last 30, 40 years that we can apply to our work. And the things that have continued to rise to the top are motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, and also juxtaposing all of that with supervision. I happen to believe that supervision, particularly in mental health work and behavioral health work, given the nature of the work itself and resources or lack thereof, and also the ways that people come to us, we need to recognize that supervision, I think, is a really grounding and pivotal place and position in agencies where people can come and hopefully supervision is very individualized. Hopefully you meet with people on a very regular basis, whether that's once a week or every 2 weeks, but it's scheduled, it's predictable. Hopefully it's a safe place for people to come and speak about not only people they're seeing and how to work best with them, but also talking about their own experience, how they're experiencing supervision. And so I've been actually training along with a number of colleagues, something called trauma-informed supervision for some time. But it occurred to me that it was really truth in advertising, MI-informed and trauma-informed supervision. And so for this particular webcast, I thought it might be fun to just pull out the MI part in particular and have us take a look at that. So I'm guessing that most of you are supervisors or want to be supervisors. You don't have to be a supervisor to be here. But at any rate, I will be speaking from a kind of a supervisory role. And how do we apply the spirit, the skills, the strategies of this approach we call motivational interviewing? I will say just a wee bit more by background. I was first introduced to motivational interviewing quite soon after the first book came out in 1991 by Miller and Rolnick. And at that time, of course, many of you would know that that stemmed directly from the substance use treatment field and was exclusively pretty much that first book focused on how to work with people who were misusing substances. And then a second edition came out about 11 years later, and that began to broaden the scope of MI and its applications. And then a third edition came out in 2013. And there we see how MI has really permeated virtually all of health and human services, corrections, schools, anywhere where people are having conversations with others about the possibility of change and growth. I'd like to suggest that supervision itself is, in kind of a casual way of talking about it, a way of helping supervisees become their very best selves in their work as mental health, behavioral health practitioners. And by that I mean, you know, at a personal level, that they bring their best selves forward. Hopefully they're taking care of themselves in a way that they're getting adequate sleep and eating well and exercising, do all those things we talk about, right? But they're also bringing their best selves forward in terms of the approaches they take in the work that they do, and particularly clinically. So we're going to explore this a bit. These are some learning objectives that I've pulled out from some of the material we'll be covering, and we'll find our way through these. So we're going to be talking about spirit or mindset and heart set of MI, the 4 processes of MI, the EOE approach or EPE approach, which is this idea of exploring, offering, and exploring when we're providing information and feedback in a supervisory role. And then also the beer model, which is a model among others that I think is helpful to frame and think about how do we provide the kind of feedback that requires corrective action. And so it has a little bit more gravity to it when we offer that. So I recognize this is a relatively short amount of time. This will be kind of an overview. We're not going to go in depth or practice skills, which I would love to do. If we were in a longer several day training, that would be a good opportunity to do that. But along the way, I do invite your questions, your comments, and I'll try to be attentive to those as we go. We do have a poll, and it's a pretty simple poll. I'm going to put it up here and ask you to complete it in just a few seconds. How familiar are you with motivational interviewing? Are you pretty much a blank slate, or are you someone who actually helped write the book? Just use your best educated guess about where you are with this. Of course, we know that a lot of people know about MI, but when it comes to the actual practice, that's kind of a different thing, right? The idea of providing and being MI. But I appreciate what I'm seeing here. The results suggest that there's a pretty good, solid knowledge of MI and your familiarity with it. And some of you, not so much. But this gives me a good flavor of where we're at. And it doesn't really matter where you are. Hopefully this will be relevant for all of you. All right, I see there's another question there. Is that correct or not? All right. So we can pull that down and we'll go from there. So let's first take a look at MI in a little more detail, just as a kind of a brief overview. And I'm just curious, what comes to your mind when you hear motivational interviewing? What's the first thing, second thing, a phrase, a term? Not that it's all comprehensive, but in the chat box, I'd love to just see you type in something. You hear motivational interviewing and you think what? Change talk, yeah. Strengths, reflective listening, really being the heart of that, and the oars, and client-centered, person-centered, collaborative, stages of change. Yeah, ambivalent. Yeah, this is great. This is great. You know your stuff, right? Here are some definitions just to remind ourselves that you've seen these. This is kind of a lay definition. It's a collaborative conversation style. And I put emphasis on style because it's not a script. It's not laid out in a way that we go from point A to point B, but it's a style in which we incorporate all of the different skills and strategies of MI to help people increase their motivation and strengthen it to make changes. And I'll, in a moment, say a little bit more about how I see this as relevant to the supervisor-supervisory relationship. We can also think of this as a person-centered way of addressing the common problem of ambivalence. We know that that tends to be the place where we get stuck sometimes, right? We feel a variety of ways about something, and that's totally natural. But that ambivalence is the place where we need to explore it further and hopefully come to some resolution so we can move forward in one direction or another. I will say this, that in supervision, supervisees are, just like everybody else, are going to be ambivalent about all kinds of things. And so that's one aspect in which I think MI is an appropriate response for this. And then we talk about MI as being simply a way of helping people talk themselves into changing. And this is, again, kind of just a way of recognizing that whereas traditional helping styles often see the problem, formulate some kind of response, and give advice and their best ideas and suggestions, MI really flips that on its head and really says, okay, I see this issue, let's explore it together. And now I want to elicit and draw out from you your ideas, your thoughts, what you might see as benefits for moving in this direction. What might happen if you don't? What might be at stake? How might you go about it? Who might help you in that? How confident are you? All of these wonderful questions that we ask in MI to really elicit from people their already existing wisdom and knowledge. And then, yes, we do sometimes, certainly as supervisors and otherwise, we say, and here are some other comments, or would it be all right if I share an idea or two that, you might find helpful? Maybe not. But it's that style of interacting with people which people take to it very well, right? They feel comfortable, they feel safe, they feel like, oh, you see in me that I have a lot to offer, I have a lot of wisdom, and it's empowering in its style because it really helps people bring their best selves forward. So I think it goes without saying that I'm a big fan of MI, of this approach. And I think for me, yes, I have a social work degree and I learned about cognitive behavioral therapy approaches and all that, but MI really augmented so much of that for me. And I'm guessing that's true for many of you. And then for some of you, you're still kind of wondering, what is this MI stuff? So to make the connection with supervision, I have a quote here from a friend who's part of the Motivational Interviewing Network of trainers. And she says, MI is a collaborative method for guiding conversations about change. When we move into supervisory roles, we often find ourselves having similar conversations about change, only this time with staff, with supervisees, rather than with clients, and often in the context of helping them manage their responsibilities, do their clinical work, and what other accountability tasks are there. So I don't know how much you've maybe thought about this before, but it's become increasingly clear to me that MI is highly relevant in terms of the style that we bring forward as supervisors and help people find their way forward. So many of you are familiar with the ingredients of MI. I'll just share them briefly. We talk about the 4 elements of spirit, the guiding processes, the conversational skills that we use, and what I call the teaspoons of change talk. And we take all of that, right? And we mix it together and we adapt it to the situation in which the client is in. We also adapt it to our own personal style. And then we find a way to have a conversation with somebody using our own unique personality, our own quirky sense of humor, perhaps, to have a helpful conversation with somebody, which really draws out from them their own understandings and wisdom. I think that it is so common in traditional helping to use what MI calls the writing reflex. We see a problem and we immediately come up with fixes for it. And that is very much what we need to suppress. And William Miller himself says, he's been working in this field. He wrote the book for 20, 25 years when he made the comment. And he said, I still have to suppress that writing reflex. So for those of you who want to make things right in the world and have the best ideas or think you do, you're in good company. And please consider suppressing those thoughts. So just to detail this out a little bit more, we talk about the elements of acceptance and sorry, I can't see my own slides in the moment. Partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation. The processes introduced in the 3rd edition are this notion of engaging, creating a relational foundation, finding a focus, evoking around the focus, and then moving to some sort of planning phase. We also talk about using open questions and affirmations and reflective listening and summaries. I was grateful to see that many of you immediately thought of reflective statements when you chatted in the chat box, because I often say if the Oars were a rock and roll band, in my way of thinking about that, which would mean the Beatles, the front person, the lead singer, would be absolutely, it would be reflective listening. And then open questions are right up there too. And then there's the change talk. And so we're continuing to tune our ears to what people are saying, both in their words, but also in the way they conduct themselves and their facial expressions, to begin to pick up on statements of desire and on how they might consider changing and why they might and who might help them and how committed they are and so on and so forth. Now, switching for a bit to supervision, again, just to kind of create a little kind of foundational understanding here. There are a lot of definitions, but here we see a disciplined tutorial process. And so there's a kind of a teaching, mentoring role, and it overlaps administrative, evaluative, clinical, and supportive functions. Another definition, which I really like, is an administrative and clinical process designed to facilitate the worker's ability to deliver the best possible services to clients. I want to just pause there for a moment. It turns out, in my view, and this is something I learned long ago, is that actually we don't provide supervision for the benefit of supervisees entirely. We primarily do it for the benefit of clients and patients that we see. That is the end goal of ensuring that the very best possible services are rendered to the people we serve. And of course, it turns out that supervisees are the vehicle for that. They're the ones who are the face and the ears and the eyes of providing the care that's needed. But I've always found it really helpful to remember that anything I might bring up with a supervisee, anything I might want to say around corrective action or possible just new approaches and different approaches, is done because it's for the benefit, hopefully, of the supervisee to then carry forward their very best selves and skills. It's a joint endeavor. It's a partnering together. And it's also a relationship. Ultimately, supervision is an interpersonal relationship. Now, it's different from a friendship. It's different from other interpersonal relationships. But we do know that given the work that we are doing, that in order to do it well, we've got to have some grounding in some solid relational experiences. And it doesn't just have to be with a supervisor, but that's one of the most pivotal, but certainly with others. And so let me just ask this. What are your expectations and hopes for supervisees? What would you just brainstorm and put out there, if you don't mind? Just whatever, again, just comes to mind. And don't worry about, don't worry about being right or wrong or about being too here. Okay. So you hope they'll be eager to learn. You hope they'll be trusting, trustworthy, curious, and they'll be people who are receptive to feedback, and that they practice wellness. And I'm only seeing the ones that they're going by so fast I can't read them all, but these are lovely. Yeah, these are the kinds of things we hope. And I'm just going to add a little bit more to the list. And I should tell you that one should never make a slide with this much detail and words on it, but hey, here it is. Yeah, we hope they're going to do stuff like this. They're going to show up. They're going to be nice. They're going to be good teammates. They're going to use creative problem-solving strategies. They're going to create the conditions for clients to feel more empowered, right? They're going to help patients find a focus, listen, help them, and ask them helpful questions. That they're going to practice good self-care, that they're going to respond to crises and emergencies in an effective manner. They're going to take their vacation days. They're going to document their work, and so on and so on and so forth, right? these are kind of the nitty-gritty things that we hope they'll do, and doing it with a sense of integrity and honesty. Now, let me ask another question. What are your goals in working with supervisees? What comes to your mind around that? And thank you to all as I go back on the chat here a little bit and see the really thoughtful comments you have. So what are your goals? Yeah, that they become caring clinicians, that we can help them learn. Yep. That you will, I think this is what I'm hearing here, you will be honest and help people build the teams, and you'll reinforce that curiosity, and that you'll help them become their best version. Yeah. And you'll have your own mindset of growth, and on and on. Absolutely. And so once again, the slide with too many words, but your goals should be to be a demonstration project of showing up on time and being nice and being an effective leader and fostering a learning attitude and using good MI skills, good trauma-informed skills, that you'll use your vacation days in a timely manner and document your work and make fair decisions and so on, so forth. Anyway, it's one way to frame, I think, and bring together this notion of we're in this together, and what we're really doing as supervisors is wanting to, first and foremost, model the behavior we want to see in supervisees. We all learn by mimicry, we learn by observing, we learn by modeling. And so the best supervisors I've ever had were people I could look to and see in them the integrity, the practice, the consistency that I knew they wanted to see in me. Another way to put that is to treat supervisees the way you want them to treat clients, because again, there's that mimetic kind of aspect of learning. And so if we treat our own supervisees in a respectful, person-centered, thoughtful, creative kind of way, that will be carried on. And in the long run, we're creating the conditions under which supervisees can grow and thrive in order to provide the best possible services and care for clients. And I think there are lots of other ways one could say this, but this is kind of how I've come to view supervision. Now, we might ask ourselves, what is it that supervisees need? And I'm drawing some content here from First Break All the Rules, a book that came out some years ago now, probably 20 plus years ago. But in it, they have taken research in which Buckingham and Kaufman and others take the research that they did with conducting 80,000 different interviews with managers around the world in all kinds of settings, nonprofit, for-profit, small, large. And what they're really doing is trying to debunk some of the traditional mythology around what makes a good manager, and really trying to tease out what is it that helps sustain employee satisfaction, retention, and helps them thrive as employees. And so I'm going to go through these briefly. You might have seen them, but I find it really helpful as a supervisor to think about, okay, where is my focus? And these are the kinds of questions that people have. Not only just when they start, but also in an ongoing way. And I think in the pandemic, people's jobs changed quite a bit, right? So do you continue to know, do our employees continue to know what's expected of them at work? Do they have a good sense of that? Do they have the materials and equipment they need? And then there's the question of at work, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? Now, I think there will be times when supervisees and ourselves will have to do something that is less than intriguing to us or less than desirable. But for the long run, if an employee is not having the opportunity to do what they're best at most of the time, then they're going to be a pretty unsatisfied employee. So here's a really apt place where we might have a conversation with people and ask, what are you best at? What are you most confident about what you do? And how can we ensure that you have an ability to do that on a regular basis? And that's not to say that we don't also ask them what are some growing edges you have, and to help nudge them in those directions. In the last week, have I received recognition or affirmation for doing good work? It seems like a no-brainer, but oftentimes we make assumptions that people know that they're doing good work, when in fact, a genuine affirmation of that is really critically important to provide. And it has to be genuine, obviously. Does my supervisor or someone at work seem to care about me as a person? So here's an interesting one in my view. It's one thing to know someone in terms of their work role, but do you actually care about them? And I trust that you do. And this is not to delve deeply into their personal lives, but to the extent a person's willing to share, do we know what they enjoy doing? Do we know how they renew themselves and restore their own sense of energy? Do we have a sense of what makes them tick, what they do for fun? These kinds of things, right? We might also ask, at work, do my opinions count, right? Do people listen to me? Am I heard? Am I seen? There's also does the mission and purpose of your organization make it feel like the job is important, right? Are my co-workers committed to doing quality work? So this brings up the piece about, am I feeling like I'm pulling too much of the load, or other people around me? And so this is about teamwork. This is about ensuring that there's an equity, a fairness in how things are assigned, and whose workload is what. And so that's an important piece. Do I have a best friend at work? Which I was a little surprised to see this when I first did, but it's not saying, does my best friend work where I work? It's saying, do I have somebody who is my go-to person, who I can just go to and feel very safe? It might be a supervisor, but it might be others too, or both and. But do I have somebody who I can just say, hey, let's go for a walk, or can I just tell you what happened? This sounds like this is a really critical piece of people's job experience. And then the question of, are people talking with me about how I can grow? How can I even grow out of the job I'm in, and maybe grow into another job? And then the question of, have I had opportunity to grow and learn? And so this is yet another area where we want to ensure that people are being given opportunities to not only attend workshops and trainings, but to put their skills into practice and to mentor others, and things like that. All right, I'll pause there. So I think you're all familiar, most of you, with the spirit of MI, and I'd like to just propose that if we approach supervision using the spirit, the mindset, the heart set of MI, we'll do well in our supervisory practice. And you'll recall that Miller and Rolnick started teaching MI focusing on the techniques, the oars, right? But then they say something was missing, and they realized that it was sort of like they were teaching folks to the right words to use, but they weren't teaching them the music, the part that brings life and brings inspiration and brings a sense of vitality to the work that we do. And so as supervisors, we want to bring forth not just, a correct interpretation of policies and procedures, and providers of information so people know what they're doing, but we want to be inspirers. We want to be people who have a sense of believing in the person we're supervising. We want to have a sense of collaborating with them. And so we talk about these 4 elements of MI spirit. And just to say a little bit more, I hope that your supervisory relationships are indeed partnerships. And that's not the same as co-equals, because you do have a number of oversight responsibilities that you need to take into account with people you supervisor. But the extent to which we can minimize the power differential and recognize that we are 2 people working in an organization doing the best we can to provide the best care for people, then it becomes a more partnering, collaborative approach. And we then rely a lot, because you hired that person for some reason, right? You hired them because they know something, they have experience. And so we really want to draw that out and rely on it and help people reflect on their work and help them grow and elaborate on what it is that they're continuing to do. I think a supervisee who's not constantly learning is a bored supervisee oftentimes, right? And we can help become the catalyst for helping people develop that. What does it look like? Well, it's physically often a side-by-side relationship, right? And also it sounds like, how about if we take a look at this together? Would it be all right if we explore this? How are you feeling about, what's your understanding of what the dynamic is here in that relationship? Let's explore together. How can I support you? And you could make up all of your own additional, ways of sounding like this is a partnership. But this is the language, if you will, of partnership. Acceptance, prizing people's inherent worth and potential, accurate empathy, supporting autonomy, affirming strengths. All of this sounds to me like really good supervisory practice, right? We prize people and we say, I really value your perspective, your wisdom. I'm so grateful for what you bring to this role, including perhaps your lived experience that you bring into this situation, which is such a helpful addition, and also what you bring to the team. And so I hope also this is a space where you can bring your whole self forward. And I bring this up deliberately because I've certainly had conversations with people of color in particular who say, I can't bring my whole self forward in the workplace because of the bias, because of the judgment, because of the racism that exists. And that might be true also for LGBTQ folks and for folks who identify in other ways. And so are we creating a space that's fully accepting and where people can bring their entire selves forward? I look forward to helping you grow and develop. These are things that we might say, how can I best support you? And then there's empathy. It sounds really complicated. You're hopeful that this will turn out better in the long run than it has up to this point. It's really scary to witness some of the choices that she's making. And it's important to you to honor her own decision-making around this. So here we're reflecting on the person's ambivalence about what's happening here. Even though you were hoping for a better outcome, you're feeling like you did everything you could. You're eager to continue developing. And so, as many of you know, the best way to provide accurate empathy is through reflective statements. And it's not particularly helpful to say, hey, I'm feeling really empathic towards you, but it is helpful to reflect back what we're seeing and hearing around the edges and making educated guesses about what the person's thinking, feeling, wondering about, hoping for, and then use that in a way to further the conversation that we have in supervisory visits. Supporting autonomy. I trust your judgment regarding this. I appreciate the way you're carefully weighing the options. I'm sure that, whatever it is that it is that you learn about this situation, that you will be able and put forth, a good try at doing the best you can in this situation. And really, it's a decision only you can make. I can't make it for you, how you proceed. And so all of these are commentary about how we support people's latitude in decision making. I remember reading a report once, a Canadian report about supervision, and what supervisees overarchingly said was the most important quality of a supervisor was the person who did not micromanage, but who trusted them and gave them a lot of latitude in deciding, in decision making around all kinds of things. And that takes trust. And of course, a person has to earn that trust, but hopefully that's something we can do. And then we talk about affirming strengths. And of course, as you saw in the things that supervisees need, a lot of it was around affirming people for their efforts, for their strengths. And I emphasize efforts here more than outcomes. We're pretty quick to emphasize outcomes, but we don't always get favorable outcomes in the work that we do. But we can still affirm the courage that people show and the effort they put forth and the patience and so on and so forth. And so a good affirmation, of course, doesn't say you showed a lot of courage. It says, and that's why we have ... here. It also says you showed a lot of courage in the way that you stood up in that meeting and said something that was not popular, but important to be said. Where that took a lot of patience to accompany that person to the Social Security office and to wait through all that time and to still keep the client engaged and staying there and so on and so forth. So compassion. What does this have to do with supervision? I don't know. I'm thinking a lot these days about this period of time we're in, the so-called re-emerging time. My experience, and I'm hearing a lot from people, that in some ways this re-emerging time, whatever that means, is actually in some ways more confusing, more difficult, more challenging than even when we kind of knew the boundaries of living with COVID, or at least knew them better. And I think compassion right now in particular is so important to show towards folks that we work with, to recognize that they are suffering. And passion, by the way, the literal meaning of the word passion means suffering. And when you're compassionate, you're entering into the hardships, the difficulties, the challenges, the suffering of people. And you're being willing to be there with them in solidarity and without trying to fix it, without trying to make it all better. That is compassion, and it's the kind of compassion we, of course, want our supervisees to show towards clients as well in their own suffering. And there's this wonderful quote that comes from, somewhere, but there's the compassion we seek is that which stands in awe of what people carry rather than stand in judgment about how they carry it. And that is something that's always stuck with me, that can we stand in awe and appreciate what it is going on and what's so hard, and then avoid and suppress standing in judgment of how people are conducting themselves under those circumstances. Just a word here too about supervising with compassionate detachment. I think many helping people find themselves struggling with boundary issues about how involved to become in people's lives as clients. And the same is true for us as supervisees. How involved do we come? How invested do we become? How much do we cross boundaries or potentially violate boundaries? These are all critical issues for supervisors. I like the concept of compassionate detachment. It's born of a deep caring, a deep interest in this person's well-being and welfare, and it's also respectful of not tramping on toes and not overcompensating or becoming too involved in the way in which we begin to actually disempower people and send the unstated message that you don't have the wherewithal to deal with this right now. So lucky for you, here I am, and I'm going to step in and take care of it. Now that's a cynical kind of way of putting it, but I think sometimes, and I'm thinking back to one of the supervisor I once had, and everything I brought up was really on my part a desire to just talk about it more, but instead he always had the answer for it. And so I dubbed him Mr. Answer Man. Not one of my best supervisory experiences with as a supervisee, but I think what I was needing and hoping for at that point was someone who would hear me, pay attention, and then seek out my own wisdom as well as share their own in it. So compassion sometimes is sitting quietly. Sometimes it's saying, I'm so sorry for everything going on here. May I bring you a latte? How can I be most helpful to you? Can we check in about this next time we meet and just see how things are going? All right. So if you're following the four different component parts of the spirit of MI, we've talked about partnership, we've talked about acceptance, we've talked about compassion, and now we come to evocation. And this is, again, something that really sets apart MI and the MI style from traditional helping, traditional supervision even. And so we want to tap into everything we can about the person's own wisdom and motivation. And I love this quote from William Miller. What if we approached all of our supervisees with the attitude set, you've already got what you need, and together we're going to find that. And when I say you've already got what you need, sure, there's sometimes a need for education and training, and there's a need for money, and there's a need for resources. But what I'm saying here is, and I think William Miller is saying, in terms of your own motivation and interest and conjuring up, the best of yourself, you've already got that inside you. I can't fill you up with that. But what I will do is try to uncover the things that are making it hard for you to express yourselves, maybe the trauma that you've experienced personally, maybe the trauma of the work that you do, help peel back some of that, hopefully, so that your own genuine interest and motivation can come forward. You've already got that in you. And so it sounds like, tell me more about the situation, help me understand what concerns you're wondering. It sounds like whether or not, if you were to try that, how might you go about it, and so on. So I am just, again, here for a summary purpose, just offering you these four elements of MI Spirit. And I want to pause for a moment, see if anyone has any thoughts, comments, questions around the application of MI Spirit to supervision. And I welcome your own examples of where you've done so or anything else. Gregory Boyle, Tattoos on the Heart, thank you so much for naming the author whose name I couldn't remember. Anyone else? Thoughts, comments? It's possible you have or you haven't before thought about MI Spirit and how it might apply to supervision, but I hope you're seeing some linkages here that can be useful for us. So I'm going to move ahead and just name that, of course, there are these four skills that we use in MI. If they're used in other kinds of approaches, but what's unique about the way they're used in MI, and I would say in supervision, is that there is a lot of focus on responding to people, particularly initially in whatever they say, with a reflective statement rather than a question. And maybe another reflective statement to add on to that, and then maybe a question. But we're really looking for a rhythm and flow in our supervisory conversations where we're doing a good bit of reflecting and also including open questions in that. And then, of course, we also want to add in affirmations, statements in which we see and name the good stuff about people in a very genuine kind of way. And then summaries can be very, very powerful, just by a way of kind of, whether in the middle of a conversation saying, let me just see if so far I've got what you're saying, or I'm understanding, or let me see if there's the details, I'm putting it together, right? And then we provide a brief summary, and then we, ask what did I miss? What would you add to that? We can also use summaries kind of near the end of a session and say, so we've been spending, the last 30 minutes or so talking about this topic. And we might even ask the other person to summarize. So how would you summarize, your understanding of what we've discussed and what the plan is and all of that? So summaries can be used by both parties, but it does show a way of listening and pulling together kind of the critical pieces of a conversation in a paragraph or two. So some of you are familiar, I imagine, with the 4 processes of MI. These were introduced in the 3rd edition. I find that they're actually more useful to me in understanding how change happens than often the stages of change, although they too have their merit. But what I like about the 4 processes is rather than trying to determine where somebody's at in their own stage of change, what we're doing here is we're looking inwardly and in the relationship and saying, where are we in this conversation in terms of how we're moving forward and how am I guiding that conversation? And so we talk about engaging as the first step of that. And this is, it can be small talk. How are you today? How was your week? But it can also be, I remember you said or how was your vacation? Or I remember you said that you were struggling a bit. What has changed, if anything? So the engaging here is really just that piece of getting to know the person, re-getting to know the person as a person and catching up with them. And it's not, when we say small talk, it's not because it's insignificant talk. It just means that it's not exactly the focus of what we're going to be exploring, but it's the way of getting a sense of who this person is in the moment. And then, of course, we want to move into a place where we begin to say, where should we focus our attention today? What's important to you to talk about? You might say for yourself, I have something I really want to bring up with you, and let's carve out some time for that as well. And then we evoke, we ask interesting questions around that focus. We listen well, and we end up, sort of beginning to tap into that already existing motivation, the desires to do a better job as a supervisee, the thoughts about how to do that, the reasons and the benefits of doing so, and invite people to articulate, all of that with you in supervision, because when we hear ourselves speak, we hear it differently and we take it more seriously than when we hear it come out of the mouth of somebody else. And so we want to really invite people to tell us all of their reasons and hows and whys and wherefores about why they might want to proceed in a certain direction, whether that's they're changing their own lives in some way or changing the way they work with clients. And then oftentimes we'll come upon a plan of some sort. And often that plan is a very simple plan. It might be, shall we talk further next time? Or it might be, what do you think might be a next step or 2 that you could take here? I just find that these 4 processes are really helpful. I like roadmaps and I'd like to know where I'm going. I don't have to know every last detail, but I find that when I'm having a guiding conversation, whether it's in MI or in supervision, I reflect on where are we in this conversation? And I think it's a useful construct. Now, having said that, I'm going to introduce to you something that's akin to that, but a little bit more detailed. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but we call it the CLEAR model for exploratory conversations. And so this is the model or a model that I think can be really valuable just when we're wanting to sit down with somebody and explore. It's not a time when we're taking corrective action. It's not a time when we're insisting on something, or it's not a time when we're educating people about something or informing them. It's a time to tap into this person's thought process and their ideas and their own life experience and take a look. And so We call this CLEAR because it stands for this acronym: Contracting, Listening, Exploring, Action, Review. And so it kind of bypasses that engagement piece that I talked about, but it goes into, the idea. So we have this time together. How shall we use it? And what do you wish to focus on today? What's really important to you? And here's something that I want to make sure we cover as well. And these are just simply sample ways that we might bring up the question or invite the conversation. And we listen then. And we listen all the time, but we listen particularly in a way that helps us understand with more kind of exploration of the details of the situation, the nuances of it, and the experience of it. And so we use a lot of reflective statements. I get a sense that you're wondering if maybe, or you're concerned, perhaps. I'm curious, how do others see it? And also, how does a trauma-informed lens affect the way you look at this situation or this person? And so lots of ways to indicate that we're listening to understand. And of course, it's not just our understanding that we're going after, it's the supervisee's own understanding of the situation that we hope will increase and grow. That's even better than our own understanding. And then we might move into an exploration. And here is one that takes it to that place of, how is this impacting you as an individual in this role that you are in? How are you feeling? What does it bring up for you? And we might call this transference, countertransference, but it's that same idea of what's coming up for you. How are you in your, not just in your head, but in your heart and your body, in fact, finding, what are you noticing about what comes up? So for example, we all find that we are with people sometimes, and the way that they engage with us is less than user friendly, right? And sometimes this is colleagues and sometimes it's clients, but what's our body telling us? Are we getting tense? Are we sweating a little bit? Are we feeling like we want to run, or we want to shut down? Are we're having a response that suggests that we're not fully safe and comfortable, and we're feeling threatened in some way or overwhelmed? These are all traumatic stress kinds of responses that will trigger for us some kind of a brain and body response, and more than that. I don't know that it's always necessary to have this level of exploration in everything we do, but I think if we avoid doing it altogether, we're really missing critical opportunities for people to grow and learn. And then we start moving towards, from the reflection on the whole situation to what might we do as in moving forward? What are some ideas that you're having about how we might move forward? Because there's always more than one way, or even two ways probably. So let's collect. Let's look at this in a stepping back way, and what is it that what ideas might you have about how we might go from here, and what might be some benefits if you take this path, as well as what might be some downsides, and what's the next step or two that you could imagine taking, and what would that be like in terms of timing? How confident are you in doing so? And you can even bring it down to the very granular level of, what's the first thing you think you might say? And then you might even act it out in supervision, right? You might do a little role play around it. Whatever is helpful to help the person prepare for taking whatever the action is. And then before letting go of or that, just go back and review it, and ask the person to remind you of the main points they heard, and what other questions, how else can you be helpful? And then there's this piece you can see about, so I'd like to take a few moments and just reflect a bit. What was it like for you, and we can both share in this, to use this approach in our supervisory relationship? How helpful was that? What did you appreciate about it? What do you think we could do to make it even better? This is kind of an evaluation step that, again, I'm guessing many of us don't do that very often, but it's a wonderful opportunity to improve the relationship, if you will, improve the sense of trust, and also to give real feedback to one another in a way that's mutual and hopefully produces a sense of growth. The second review, of course, is what happens after the fact, and you meet again, and then you learn what happened, how did it work out, what did you learn from that situation, and so on and so forth. So I'm just pausing for a moment. Mila, I'm seeing your comment, and that this spirit of MI is being advocated for in the mainstream of behavioral health. Yeah, wonderful to hear that. Yeah, you're discovering that there's a lot you already are all doing around this, and I hope that's true for virtually everyone on the call, right? But sometimes it's helpful just to name it and put it in a framework that reminds us of, oh, this is important, and all of that. And then I see you're saying something about the fundamental understanding of some of the indigenous healing traditions, and that is so critically important. And decolonizing behavioral health field. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in that area for sure. And let's face it, behavioral health systems, MI even, are very much based on white dominant cultural norms, and they're seen as norms, but they're not norms for everybody, right? And so how do we expand and develop a sense of racial equity and equity socially in all of what we do in behavioral health and healthcare? And I think that MI is a good sort of catalyst for that, for having those conversations. And that said, MI is also quite Eurocentric in the way it's presented. So I want to acknowledge that. But we can all take all of this, because I think a lot of this is all based on ancient wisdom that goes beyond any one approach. And so how do we take that ancient wisdom? Because I think we know inside what is most respectful, what is most helpful, what is most mindful with whomever we're working, and to pay attention to that. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry, I'm not giving it the attention that I like, but I'm going to save this chat box. So explore, offer, explore. Some of you are familiar with something that the MI world often calls elicit, provide, elicit, EPE. And this is just another variation on that theme. But how do we provide feedback to people in a trauma-informed, person-centered, strengths-oriented style? And again, this is feedback that is not something that the person's compelled to follow up on, but it's a little stronger than just, exploring stuff. It's feedback that might come up when somebody, is late occasionally, and you want to comment on that before it becomes a pattern. Maybe it's about paperwork not being done on a timely fashion, or not done in the way it should be. Maybe it's related to a passing comment you heard the person make that raised a yellow flag for you. And of course, it's feedback about all the positive stuff too. But here I'm going to focus a little bit more on how do we bring up the things that are sometimes harder for us to bring up. And I think the first of many things to remember is it's often easy for us to overestimate how much of this we need to give. It's, people have a lot of self-awareness when they screw up, if you will, and they don't need to be reminded of it all the time. Although there are times when we need to be able to comment on it and bring some resolution to it. This is just a quirky quote from Terry Pratchett, who says, after all, when you seek advice from someone, you certainly don't want it. You're just trying to have them sit there while you listen to yourself talk out loud. And this isn't always true, but I do think it's worth remembering that even when people say, what would you do in this situation? Or what advice would you give me? Or what suggestions do you have? Before we jump into that too quickly and answer as supervisors, I think it's wise, if we haven't done so already, to turn it back to the person and say, I'm happy to share some thoughts I'm having, but I'd love to hear a little more about what comes up for you. What are your thoughts? And use your own creative juices, if you will. So it's not, playing with the person in a negative way. It's just saying, yes, we're in this together. It's a partnership. And I don't want you just to sort of focus in on what you think I would do, because that's often given much more weight than it deserves in many cases, right? So what are we looking at? Well, we check in with ourselves. What is the feedback that needs to be given? And what are the ethical, legal, professional kind of things that compel that? And then we might just remind ourselves, why is it important? It really is about the best care that we can provide for clients, but it's also a recognition that we're all learning works in progress. And, there's no such thing as perfection, but there is a growth that we seek with people. But we want to be patient with the person, but impatient about the client care people are receiving. And I don't know about you, but it's difficult for me, partly because I like to be liked. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. It's annoying that I have to spend that extra time and effort to have that conversation. I really, really do want people just to work stuff out on their own and keep me out of it. And it's just hard to know how to frame constructive feedback. So one way people sometimes think about this is a sandwich mode. Might be helpful to you, it might not, but the first explore is really this conversation. So we have a topic at hand, and let's say it's about, doing paperwork properly and making sure it's completed according to the standards of the organization. And so we might, and this will feel a little artificial, but we might test. So, what do you already know about how we're supposed to do this? And what would be helpful to know if there's some missing pieces there? And would it be all right if I share with you a little bit more information about how I think you might improve your paperwork? And then we offer that in small doses, not big laundry lists. But here's one thing that I think could be really helpful. Maybe it's about, I won't make it up, but you all have your own ideas of what that information, advice, suggestions might be. And then we go back to the explore. And what do you make of that? What are your thoughts? How does that resonate with you? How might you incorporate that potentially into your way of working, or perhaps other ideas that you have? So it's still a very partnering interactional relationship, but in this case, the offer is brought up because there is some feedback that we need to offer to really nudge the person to a new level of understanding and to nudge them in a direction. And so, I think for time's sake, we probably won't go through this, but we could go through a vignette where we take a look at that, and these slides will be available to you. But it might be interesting to make up your own vignette or another where you have this back and forth, and then you have the supervisor offer this explore approach in providing feedback to the individual. And then, of course, there's times when we take corrective action. And I know that your own HR and you have things that you need to abide by, but there's also that corrective action that is part of the conversation we have with people. It's not just about the paperwork, right? And so the beer approach is really this notion of identifying the behavior, being clear about that, identifying and naming the effect it's having, whether that's on the client or clients or the milieu or on staff, colleagues. Name the expectation that you have, and name the result that you expect to be forthcoming. Now, there are many ways you can frame that and say it, some of which are going to be more kind of authoritative and kind of heavy-handed than others. But however you choose to do it, it is important to be clear. And here's a feedback planner. And I do recommend, if you're in a situation where you're feeling uncomfortable about giving feedback, that is moving towards corrective action, you might begin by saying, okay, what are the behavior or behaviors that you want to see redirected and that you want this person to improve in? Because it's gotten to a point, a threshold where this is not okay and it does need to change. And you can make that clear to the person that this is something that needs to happen. And you can also, in the midst of that, though, ask, what are you noticing as the supervisee? What are your thoughts about this? And what have you noticed? What concerns do you have even about it? And then we talk about the effect it's having. And you can also ask here, what do you see as the effect it's having on others, if they do? But you can also make sure you describe kind of what you've observed and the impact it's having. And then the expectations would be the next step, and be very clear about, this is the standard of care, this is the expectation, this is where I want to see you move to. And then the results piece is really about saying, I need an outcome, probably by a certain date. I'm going to be reviewing your work. I'm going to be talking with you about this. However that plays itself out, but it's results oriented with the expectation that those results will be there. Now, there is kind of an implicit threat in all of that. I know that, and I don't know how to get away from that, because if the results don't get attained, then there's a problem, right? And then there's going to be another level of intervention that will occur. But again, I offer you a vignette. We're about to close shop here, but in this case, this is relevant to working during COVID and the emergence and people still seeing each other on Zoom. And you hear two different clients complaining that Ari, their case manager, let's say, or their counselor, is doing things while providing services and care. They're making lunch for their kids. They're checking cell phone messages. You see somebody walking back and forth behind the screen. It's not egregious, but it's also not acceptable behavior, right? And so you need to provide feedback, and you need to expect this will change. And so it'd be interesting to just test out, try out, play with what you might say in that circumstance. All right. I am going to bring this to a close by just providing you a few sample summarizing statements here that you can read for yourself, and also a few more. And then I'm just going to say thank you so much. I so appreciate your attention and time. I know I did a lot of the talking, but I hope you were talking to yourself in the midst of it and having a conversation. And I'll turn it back now to Christina.
Thank you so much, Ken. It feels like it was just over in a blip. We could really spend a lot more time going into this. So I really appreciate you touched on so many important things. I'm sure we all can empathize. And so thank you for your time and your energy and your spirit for presenting this topic. Just want to share and say thanks to everybody who attended today. Your feedback's really important. The link is in the chat. So we really do take these seriously, and we really like to know how these different sessions are resonating with you and if we should try to do them again in the future. So please let us know what you think. If you aren't getting our newsletter or haven't been to our website, or you happen to do social media, that's how you can get in touch with us, and you'll hear about these things in the future, so you can know. And as was stated in the chat, these slides, the recording and all of that will be posted in a couple of weeks, and we'll let you know. Thank you so much, Ken. Thanks to all of you for taking time to learn about this important topic. We're really excited to join with you today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So thanks, everybody.